Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we are bringing you 7 deeply disturbing true Arizona ghost town horror stories that will make you question what really remains in the forgotten corners of the American Southwest. These are not campfire legends or folklore passed down through generations, but documented encounters from people who walked through abandoned streets where time stopped decades ago and something else moved in to fill the silence. Episode 2 takes us deeper into the sun-bleached ruins and collapsed mine shafts where the line between the living and the dead has worn dangerously thin. Each account has been gathered from first-hand testimonies, local records, and the kind of confessions people only share when they can no longer carry the weight alone. The ghost towns scattered across Arizona's desert landscape are more than crumbling relics of the Old West. They are places where violence, greed, and desperation soaked into the earth and never truly left. If you crave authentic horror rooted in real locations and real fear, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our next journey into the darkness that history tried to bury. After you hear these 7 accounts tonight, share your own experiences with Arizona's abandoned places or any ghost town encounter that still haunts you in the comments below. Now settle in, turn down the lights, and let us walk together through the streets where the past refuses to stay silent. My name is George, and before last year I would have told you that ghost towns were nothing more than free locations for photography and a cheap way to feel brave. I grew up loving old westerns and rusted cars half buried in sand. So when I finally got enough time off work, I decided to spend a weekend alone in Chloride, Arizona, chasing that cinematic solitude I always thought I wanted. I told everyone I just needed to clear my head, to get away from the noise of the city. But that was only part of it. The truth is, I needed to prove to myself that I was not as fragile as people kept telling me, that one bad year had not broken me permanently. I left out one detail when I bragged about this trip. I did not mention that I chose Chloride specifically because it was quiet, because no one I knew would be around to see me fall apart if my anxiety came back. The road into Chloride is the kind of road that makes you feel like the rest of the world has simply stopped existing. Asphalt turns to broken, faded gray, then to hard-packed dirt. The radio dies into static. The last gas station sits behind you like a decision you cannot undo. I remember rolling my window down and letting the desert air flood the car, hot and mineral dry, as the town finally came into view. Old wooden storefronts, leaning a little too far to one side. Rusting mining equipment scattered on the hills like bones. A handful of houses that looked empty from the road, even the ones that supposedly were not. To most people, it would have looked dead. To me, at that moment, it felt like possibility. I checked into a small motel on the edge of town, a low stucco building with peeling paint and a faded sign that buzzed weakly in the heat. The woman at the front desk slid me the key without much interest. But she did ask one question that stuck with me. She wanted to know if I planned on wandering around after dark. When I said probably, she paused for just a second and told me to stick to the main drag and avoid any houses that looked too well kept. I laughed it off as local superstition and assured her I was just there to take pictures of old signs and junked cars. She did not smile. She only said that the desert could swallow people faster than they expected, especially the kind who thought they were alone. I spent that first afternoon walking up and down the main street with my camera, taking shots of broken windows, faded murals, and metal scraps catching the harsh light. The heat was intense, but the emptiness felt almost peaceful. Every footstep echoed off the building fronts, and the only other sounds were the buzz of insects and the occasional clink of loose gravel under my boots. I passed by a few occupied houses, but the curtains stayed closed and no one waved back. The only sign of recent activity was a neat row of cigarette butts on the ground outside a boarded-up house with a rusted truck parked beside it. The truck looked like it could still run if someone cared enough to turn the key. As the sun began to sink, the town started to change. Colors shifted from bleached white to deep orange and red, shadows stretching long across the empty street. I should have gone back to the motel then, but that is when my stubbornness kicked in. I did not drive 6 hours just to hide in a room the moment it got a little eerie. I told myself that if I could handle one night alone among these ruins, I could handle anything waiting for me back home. So I kept walking, heading toward the older, more ruined part of town where the pavement crumbled into dirt and the houses leaned together like they were sharing secrets. That was where I first noticed the circle of stones. At the edge of the town, near a cluster of half-collapsed shacks, someone had arranged a ring of rocks about 6 feet across. It was not natural. The stones were roughly the same size and shape, and they were clean, as if they had been handled recently. Inside the circle, the ground was bare, stripped of weeds and debris. In the center sat a single metal folding chair, facing an old house whose front door had been replaced with a heavy steel one, far too new for the rest of the structure. The sight of that chair, just sitting there in the middle of the circle, bothered me more than I wanted to admit. It felt like I had stumbled onto something that was meant to be private, something that was still in use. I raised my camera to take a photo and hesitated. For the first time that day, I felt genuinely watched. The street behind me was empty. The windows I could see were dark and still. But there was a weight in the air, a pressure at the back of my neck. I tried to shake it off and moved closer, telling myself that it was just the creeping unease of being alone too long in a place everyone else had abandoned. Still, I did not step into the circle. I walked around it instead, circling the steel door of the house, looking for any sign of recent living. There were footprints in the dirt leading up the steps, not just one set but several, overlapping. Some deep and heavy, others light and short, like a child. That made less sense than anything I had seen yet. The steel door was locked with a thick padlock, but one of the side windows had been boarded up lazily, with only 2 nails holding a warped plank of wood in place. I knew what I should have done at that moment. I should have taken my pictures of the outside and gone back to my room. Instead, curiosity and pride pushed me further. I told myself I was just gathering atmosphere for my photos, that this was the kind of detail people loved. I tapped the plank. It shifted easily. With very little effort, I pried it back and squeezed through the gap. The air inside the house was cool and stale, like a basement left closed for years. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light, sneaking in through the cracks and the window I forced open. At first, I could not make sense of what I was seeing. The front room was strangely clean. The floor had been swept. There was a table against one wall, and on it lay stacks of photographs, neatly sorted into piles. I moved closer, and my breath caught in my throat. Every photograph showed people standing somewhere in or near chloride. Couples posing by the old signs, families squinting into the sun, friends laughing in front of the same rusting cars I had been shooting all afternoon. The pictures were not old. The clothing styles, the cars in the background, even some of the watermarks told me these were from the last few years. Some of the photos had dates written on them in black marker, others had names. A few had both. But scattered through the stacks were images where the faces had been scratched out, not just crossed, but gouged away with something sharp until the paper tore. I felt my stomach twist as I realized how many photos there were. Dozens, maybe hundreds. I had not seen anywhere near that many people in town. Most of the pictures were smiling and casual, the sort of shot a stranger would have to creep up and take from a distance. The back wall held something worse. Someone had taken a sheet of plywood and turned it into a map of sorts, marking the town with thumbtacks and bits of string. Certain buildings had multiple strings leading to them, ending in pinned photographs like trophies. Next to each cluster was a list of dates. I did not understand what I was looking at until I noticed a familiar logo in the corner of one photo. It belonged to a missing person flyer that had circulated online a year earlier. A young couple, last seen on a road trip, believed to have vanished somewhere in the Southwest. Seeing their smiling faces pinned up here, eyes scratched away, made my legs feel weak. It took me far too long to notice the photo at the very edge of the board. It was slightly crooked, like it had been pinned in a hurry. The image showed a man standing on the main street of Chloride, one hand raised to shield his eyes from the sun, camera strap across his chest. He was mid-step, caught in motion. The angle was from behind and to the side, like someone had followed him at a distance. It took my brain a few seconds to accept that I was looking at myself. The clothes, the bag, the way my head tilted toward the window across the street. There was no mistaking it. Above the photo, in black marker, someone had written the date. It was today. My first reaction was denial. I tried to convince myself that I was misreading it, that the writing was older and just looked fresh, that someone had printed the wrong date on the camera. But the marker lines were sharp and dark, not faded or dusty. The tack still gleamed. I stared at the picture, feeling the room tilt around me. Someone had been close enough to take that shot without me noticing. Someone had watched me walking, selected me, and then brought that photo into this house and pinned it up, with the date marked like an event. I should have turned and run right then. Instead, I made my second mistake. I whispered, without thinking, "Who are you?" The sound of my own voice in that quiet room was jarring. It was answered not by words, but by the soft scrape of something heavy moving in the next room. My entire body went cold. Until that moment, I had been operating under the comfortable illusion that this place was empty, that I was intruding on something only in the past. That illusion died with that sound. I turned off the small flashlight on my phone at once, plunging myself into deeper shadow. Slow footsteps crossed a floor I could not see, steady and unhurried, like whoever was out there already knew exactly where everything was. I dropped to a crouch beside the table, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Whoever was in the next room muttered something under their breath, words I could not make out. And then a metal clink rang out, followed by the rhythmic squeak of a marker being dragged across a surface. I risked a look toward the doorway. The other room was darker, but I could see the faint outline of a human figure standing at what must have been another wall. The person lifted their arm and made a slow, deliberate motion. Another clink, another squeak. They were writing something on the board, on the wall. I suddenly had a sick, vivid image of my own name being added beneath that photograph. I inched toward the window I'd come through, trying not to jostle the table or knock over any of the stacked photos. Every shift of my weight felt thunderous. The steps in the next room stopped. Silence pressed in, broken only by the buzzing in my own ears. Then a voice spoke, low and calm, and far too close to the doorway. The words were plain, almost casual. The voice said that it was good to see people still coming through, that the town needed that. It mentioned how tourists never understood how alive a place could stay if someone cared enough to watch, to keep track, to make sure no one got lost without it being noticed. My skin crawled at the way the voice lingered on that last word. I did not answer. I did not breathe. The floor creaked, and I saw a shadow slide longer across the doorway. Whoever it was had turned in my direction. The voice chuckled, soft and dry, and commented on how quiet some people got when they realized they were not alone. Then the footsteps started again, crossing the room slowly toward where I hid. I could hear the faint jingle of keys with each step. Picture them hanging from a belt, the same way I had seen keys hung by that steel door earlier. Panic finally overrode my pride. I lunged the last few inches to the window, scraping my arms on the splintered frame as I hauled myself through. Behind me, the steps quickened. A hand brushed the back of my boot as I kicked free, boots hitting the dirt outside harder than I intended. I did not stop to look back. I ran, stumbling over rocks and broken boards, sprinting past the circle of stones and the waiting chair, not daring to glance at the steel door. I ran until the neat line of cigarette butts and the rusted truck were behind me, until the main street opened up, until the motel sign came into view like a cheap, ugly miracle. I did not sleep that night. I packed my bag, stuffed my camera into its case without checking the photos, and sat in the darkness of my room watching the parking lot through the thin curtain. At one point, I saw the rusted truck drive slowly past, its engine surprisingly smooth. The driver did not turn his head toward the motel, but I could feel his attention like a weight. He made a slow loop around the lot and then disappeared back down the road toward town. I waited until dawn before I finally forced myself to move. When the sky turned pale and colorless, I checked out. The woman at the front desk did not ask why I was leaving a day early. She just took the key and told me, in that same flat voice, that some people found the town too quiet for their taste. I wanted to tell her what I had seen, to demand if she knew what was happening in that house with the steel door, but the words stuck in my throat. Maybe I was afraid she would look at me with recognition. Maybe I was afraid she would not be surprised at all. I thought that once I got on the highway, the feeling would fade, that the weight on my chest would lighten with every mile between me and chloride. Instead, something else happened. At the first rest stop, I pulled out my wallet and a crumpled receipt fell into my hand. There, scribbled in my own handwriting, was a license plate number. I did not remember writing it down. It took me a moment to place it. Then my blood ran cold. It belonged to a blue SUV I had seen pull into town just as I arrived the previous afternoon, a couple inside laughing as they took selfies with the old sign. I had not seen that vehicle leave. Later that week, a missing persons post started circulating online. A couple on a road trip, last seen heading toward an old mining town in Arizona. Their photo looked painfully familiar. I stared at their faces, then at the unreadable plate number on the grainy security image attached to the article, and knew it matched the one on my receipt. I had been there when they arrived. I had walked away when I saw that wall of photographs. I had kept my mouth shut when I checked out. This is my confession, for whatever it is worth. I went to chloride to prove to myself that I was not breakable, that my fears were just stories my mind told in the dark. Instead, I walked into a place where someone else was writing the stories, cataloging the people who drifted through, deciding who would leave and who would not. I escaped, but I left more than footprints behind. I left a piece of proof sitting in my glove box, a crumpled receipt with a plate number I still have not given to anyone. I tell myself that I am going to make that call, that I am going to walk into a station and place it on a desk. Until I do, every time I look in my rearview mirror at night, I half expect to see a rusted truck following at a careful distance, headlights off, just close enough to keep me in frame. Dear Dr. Hartley, I know you told me that writing these letters was optional, that I could stop any time the exercise stopped helping, but I need to finish this one, even if I never send it. You asked me during our last session what specific moment made me stop traveling. What singular event triggered the pattern of avoidance that brought me into your office in the first place? I told you it was complicated, that grief does not work on a timeline, and you nodded in that patient way you always do. But that was not the whole truth. The real answer is simpler and far worse than complicated grief. The answer is Bisbee, Arizona, and what happened in that ghost town 3 years after my sister died. Emma and I used to travel together every summer. We started the tradition when we were teenagers. Just small road trips around the Southwest, chasing old mining towns and roadside attractions that nobody else cared about anymore. She loved the history, the architecture, the way these places held onto their stories even after everyone left. I loved spending time with her, listening to her talk about ore deposits and boom towns like they were the most fascinating things in the world. When she died in that accident, the trips died with her. I could not imagine visiting those places without her commentary filling the silence, without her terrible jokes about prospectors and desert heat. So I stopped going. I stopped doing a lot of things. But 3 years is a long time to carry guilt. And eventually, I convinced myself that going back to one of our old routes might help me feel close to her again instead of just empty. I chose Bisbee because it had been her favorite. A real ghost town perched on a hillside with a church that still stood intact, even though most of the other buildings had collapsed into themselves. She used to say the church looked like it was keeping watch over the dead town, like it refused to let go even when everything else had given up. I thought that visiting it alone might feel like honoring her memory instead of betraying it. I was wrong about that. I arrived in Bisbee on a Thursday afternoon in late October. The drive up the winding mountain road felt surreal, like I was moving through a memory that had started to fade at the edges. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The streets were narrower. The buildings leaned at sharper angles. Even the sky seemed lower, pressing down on the town like it wanted to smother what was left. I parked near the base of the hill and started walking, camera in hand, trying to follow the same route Emma and I had taken years before. The air was cooler than I expected, almost cold despite the sun, and it carried a metallic smell that reminded me of old coins. The church sat at the top of the hill, exactly where it had always been, its bell tower rising above the scattered ruins like a skeletal finger pointing at nothing. The building itself was surprisingly intact. The walls still held their whitewash, though it had faded and cracked in long vertical lines. The front door hung open on rusted hinges, revealing a dark interior I could not see into from where I stood. What struck me immediately was the bell tower. The last time I'd been here with Emma, there had been a frayed rope hanging down through the opening, swaying slightly in the wind. Now there was nothing. The rope was gone entirely, and the bell itself sat silent and motionless in the shadows above. I stood at the base of the hill, staring up at the church when the bell rang. It was a single, clear note that cut through the stillness like a blade, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There was no wind. There was no rope. There was no reason for that bell to move, let alone ring with such clarity. The sound echoed off the hillside and faded slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the metal had shifted with temperature. Maybe a bird had landed on it. Maybe I was hearing things because I was tired and emotionally raw. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations fit the deliberate, measured tone of that single strike. I kept walking, trying to ignore the unease crawling up my spine. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had come all this way, and I was not going to let one strange sound send me running back to the car. I passed by the old general store where Emma and I had taken photos of ourselves, pretending to shop for supplies we did not need. I stood in the same spot trying to recreate the angle, trying to feel something other than hollow. That was when the bell rang again. One strike, just as clear, just as impossible. This time I turned and looked directly at the tower. Nothing moved. The bell sat perfectly still in the frame of the opening, backlit by the pale sky. I waited, holding my breath, watching for any sign of motion. The air around me was dead calm. Not even the dust stirred. After a long moment, I forced myself to keep moving, heading toward the collapsed schoolhouse on the far side of the street. The bell did not ring again until I reached the doorway. One strike. Louder this time, like it was closer even though I had moved farther away. A pattern started to emerge over the next hour. Every time I approached a place Emma and I had visited together, the bell would ring once. The old saloon, the mining office, the overlook where we had eaten sandwiches and talked about what it must have been like to live in a place this remote. Each location triggered that single, deliberate note. I tried going to places we had never explored, buildings we had walked past without stopping. The bell stayed silent. It was only the places tied to her, tied to us, that pulled that sound from the tower. I should have left then. I should have recognized that whatever was happening was not natural and not something I wanted to understand. But grief does strange things to logic. Part of me started to wonder if this was her. If somehow Emma was trying to reach out, to let me know she was still present in the places we had shared. It was a desperate, irrational thought, but it took root in my mind and would not let go. So instead of running, I started counting. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, writing down each ring as it happened. One at the saloon, one at the schoolhouse, one at the overlook, one at the general store, one at the mining office. By the time the sun started to sink, I had recorded 11 rings. 11. The number sat in my chest like a stone. I scrolled back through my call log, something I had not done in years, something I had avoided because I knew what I would find. The night Emma died, she had called me. I had been at a work dinner, phone on silent, annoyed at the interruption when I saw her name flash across the screen between courses. I had sent it to voicemail. She called again 20 minutes later. Voicemail, then again, and again. She called 11 times that night before the accident. 11 calls I never answered because I was too busy, too distracted, too convinced that whatever she needed could wait until morning. The realization made my knees weak. I sank down onto the steps of the old saloon, staring at the church tower in the failing light. The bell had not just been ringing at random. It had been counting the moments I had ignored her, counting the chances I had missed. I sat there as the sky turned from blue to purple to black, waiting to see if it would ring a 12th time, if there was some message or meaning I had not yet understood. The silence stretched on. The stars came out. The temperature dropped. And still, the bell did not ring again. I finally forced myself to stand and walk back toward my car, my legs stiff and unsteady. I had not eaten since morning. I had not had water in hours. I needed to find a place to stay for the night, to sleep and process what had happened, to decide whether I was losing my mind or experiencing something I could not explain. There was a small motel at the edge of town, barely more than a converted house with a few rooms above an old bar. The sign still flickered weakly in the dark, advertising vacancy in letters that had not been updated in decades. I checked in with a man who barely looked at me, just handed me a key and pointed toward the stairs. The room was sparse and cold, with a single bed, a cracked mirror, and a window that overlooked the hillside where the church tower rose black against the stars. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that tower, willing myself to look away and failing. The exhaustion finally started to pull at me, dragging my eyelids down, making my thoughts slow and thick. I kicked off my shoes and lay back without bothering to pull the covers down. Sleep came faster than I expected, heavy and dreamless. I woke to the sound of the bell. It was ringing in a pattern now, not single strikes, but a repeated, uneven rhythm that had no melody, just a jarring series of notes that made my head throb. I sat up in the dark, disoriented, trying to remember where I was. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed faintly. 3:13 in the morning. The exact time the police had told me Emma's car left the road. The exact time she had been alone, hurt, waiting for help that came too late. The ringing stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the wooden stairs outside my room. They moved with a strange, uneven gait, like someone dragging one foot slightly behind the other. I held my breath, every muscle in my body locked tight, listening as the steps reached the top of the stairs and moved down the hallway toward my door. They stopped directly outside. I could see the shadow of feet blocking the thin line of light beneath the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. I sat frozen on the bed, unable to move, unable to think, just waiting for whatever was on the other side of that door to make the next move. Then I heard her voice. It was muffled, distorted, like it was coming through water or a bad phone connection, but it was unmistakably Emma. She said my name, just once. Soft and questioning, the way she used to say it when she needed my attention. Then she asked why I never answered. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw the door open and beg for forgiveness, to explain that I had been stupid and selfish, and that I would give anything to go back and pick up the phone. But I could not move. My body refused to obey. I sat there, paralyzed, as the voice on the other side of the door repeated the question. Softer this time, almost a whisper. Why did you never answer? I do not know how long I sat there listening to that whisper repeat itself, growing fainter each time until it was barely audible. Eventually, the shadow beneath the door shifted. The footsteps started again, moving away, back down the hallway, back down the stairs. I heard them cross the floor below, heard the front door of the building creak open and then swing shut. Only then did I find the courage to move. I stumbled to the window and pressed my face against the cold glass, looking down at the street below. The pavement was empty. The town was silent. But leading away from the building, clear in the pale light of the moon, was a trail of wet footprints. They were small, far too small to belong to an adult, and they left dark smudges on the dry ground as they moved in a straight line toward the church. I watched them until they disappeared into the shadows at the base of the hill. And then I sank to the floor, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I left Bisbee before dawn, throwing my things into my bag and abandoning the room without checking out. I drove for hours without stopping, putting as much distance between myself and that town as I could manage. But leaving did not fix anything. The calls started a week later. My phone would ring at random times, always from an unknown number, always in the middle of the night. When I answered, there was only static on the other end, thick and heavy, broken occasionally by a faint sound that could have been breathing or could have been the distant echo of a bell. I stopped answering after the first few times, but the calls kept coming. They still come. I have tried blocking the numbers. I have tried changing my number entirely. It does not matter. The calls find me, and sometimes, late at night when I am alone and the apartment is too quiet, I hear that same uneven rhythm from Bisbee, the pattern of rings that matches no melody I have ever known. I have started answering every unknown call now, no matter the time, no matter how exhausted I am. I pick up and I wait, listening to the static, waiting for her voice to come through clearly just once so I can finally say what I should have said years ago. But she never speaks. There is only the static and the bell, and the awful certainty that somewhere in the dark, something is still waiting for an answer I can never give. That is why I stopped traveling, Dr. Hartley. That is why I cannot sleep. That is why I sit in your office every week and nod when you talk about closure and healing, knowing that some doors, once you walk through them, can never be closed again. Bisbee taught me that. The bells taught me that. And now, no matter how far I run, I carry that lesson with me, ringing in my ears, counting every call I will never answer in time. This is Detective Ramirez, badge number 4127, recording statement from witness Harry Coleman, case file reference J2024-1891, regarding incidents at 412 Hill Street, Jerome, Arizona. Subject has requested this testimony be recorded in full. Statement begins now. Mr. Coleman, please state your name and occupation for the record. My name is Harry Coleman. I took a seasonal maintenance job in Jerome last fall. The position was supposed to last 3 months, just keeping an eye on some of the tourist shops that stay closed during the off-season, making sure pipes do not freeze and roofs do not cave in. The pay was decent, and they offered housing, which was the main draw for me. I had just finished a rough stretch of unemployment, and I needed something steady, something simple. The room they gave me was above an old antique shop on Hill Street, directly overlooking the main drag and a row of abandoned buildings across the way. The view was actually pretty nice during the day. You could see straight down the mountain, all the way to the valley. At night, though, the street went completely dark. No streetlights work in that part of town anymore. Just my window and maybe 1 or 2 others scattered up the hill. The first week went by without anything unusual. I would spend my days walking through empty shops, checking for leaks and making sure the heat stayed on low. I would come back in the evenings, make dinner, and sit by the window reading or scrolling through my phone. The isolation did not bother me. I had spent most of the previous year alone anyway, and the quiet felt almost comforting. On the 8th night, I got up to close the blinds before bed, and that is when I saw him for the first time. There was a man standing in the window of the old hotel directly across the street. The building had been condemned for years. Most of the upper floors had collapsed inward, and the windows were either boarded up or just empty frames. But this one window, on the 2nd floor, had glass still intact, and standing behind it was a figure. He was perfectly still, facing my direction. I could not make out any features because the inside of that building was pitch black, but I could see his outline clearly, shoulders square, head slightly tilted. At first, I thought it might be a mannequin, maybe left over from some old display, or a Halloween decoration someone had forgotten to take down. I stared at it for a minute, then shrugged and pulled my blinds closed. I did not think about it again until the next night. Same time, same window. The figure was there again, same posture, same stillness. Only this time, it was in a different window. Not the one from the night before, but 3 frames to the left, on the same floor. That bothered me more than it should have. If it was a mannequin, someone would have had to move it. If it was a person, They would have had to be standing there for hours in a freezing, unstable building with no reason I could imagine. I told myself it was probably just another maintenance worker, someone doing the same job I was, but on the buildings that were too far gone to save. Still, I could not shake the feeling that whoever it was had been watching me specifically. The angle was too direct, the stillness too deliberate. The next morning, I walked across the street to check the hotel. The front entrance was chained shut, but one of the side doors had been pried open at some point, probably by kids or vagrants. I stepped inside carefully, testing each floorboard before putting my full weight down. The air inside was damp and sour, thick with mold and rot. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, which groaned so loudly I almost turned back. The hallway stretched in both directions, doors hanging open or missing entirely. I found the room with the window where I had seen the figure. The floor was covered in broken glass, plaster dust, and bird droppings. In the center of the room, directly beneath the window, was a set of footprints in the dust. They were clean and recent, the treads still visible. But they stopped in the middle of the floor. There were no prints leading in, no prints leading out. Just those 2 feet, planted in the dust, facing the window. I backed out of that room and did not go into the hotel again. But I kept watching. Every night, around the same time, the figure would appear. Sometimes in the same window, sometimes in a different one. Always facing me, always perfectly still. I started keeping a log, writing down which window he appeared in and what time I first noticed him. I told myself I was being rational, that documenting it would help me figure out what was happening. But the truth is, I was becoming obsessed. I stopped closing my blinds. I would sit in the dark, staring across the street, waiting for him to show up. When he did, I would stare back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. After 2 weeks of this, I realized something that made my skin crawl. The figure was not just appearing in different windows, he was mimicking me. If I tilted my head to the right, his silhouette would shift the same way a few seconds later. If I raised my hand to scratch my neck, his outline would move in the same gesture. The delay was slight, just a beat or two behind, but it was unmistakable. I tested it over and over, moving in specific ways, watching him echo my motions like a shadow that had learned to exist on its own. I stopped going to the window after that. I kept the blinds closed and tried to ignore the pull I felt to look, to check if he was still there. But the compulsion was overwhelming. On the 23rd night, I gave in. I opened the blinds just a crack and peeked through. The figure was not in the hotel. The windows across the street were empty and dark. For a moment, I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Then I saw the reflection in my own window. He was standing directly behind me. I spun around so fast, I nearly fell. The room was empty, completely empty. But I had seen him, clear as anything, standing just over my shoulder in the glass. I could still see the afterimage burned into my vision, the shape of his head, the angle of his shoulders. My hands were shaking as I turned back to the window. The reflection was gone, but I could hear something. Breathing, slow and steady just inches from my ear. And beneath it, a sound like broken glass crunching under weight, even though my floor was clean. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my bed with every light on, facing the door, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But I knew I had not. The next morning, I went to my supervisor and told him I was quitting. I did not explain why. I just said the isolation was getting to me and I needed to leave. He did not argue. I think he could see something in my face that made him uncomfortable. I packed my things and left Jerome that afternoon. I thought that would be the end of it. I moved 2 towns over, got a job at a hardware store, tried to rebuild some kind of normal routine. But 3 weeks ago, I started seeing posts online. Tourists visiting Jerome, sharing photos of the historic buildings, talking about how charming and eerie the town was. In the background of one photo, barely visible, was the antique shop where I used to live. And in the upper window, the one that used to be mine, there was a figure, standing perfectly still, facing the camera. More photos started appearing, different tourists, different angles, different times of day. But that window kept showing up, and so did the figure, always in the same position, always watching. One person commented that they had tried to go inside the shop to see who it was, but the door was locked and the place looked abandoned. Another said they had seen the figure move when they looked away, like it shifted positions only when no one was directly watching. I contacted the property owner and asked if anyone had been hired to replace me. He said no. The building was still vacant. He had been trying to find someone willing to stay there, but applicants kept backing out after seeing the place. When I asked him why, he said they all gave the same reason. They felt watched. He laughed when he said it, like it was a joke. I did not laugh. That brings me to why I am here, Detective. I need this on record. I need someone official to know what I saw, what I experienced, and what is still happening in that building. I do not know what it is. I do not know if it was ever human or if it is something else entirely. But it learned from me. It studied me. And now it is doing the same thing to anyone who looks too long at that window. I am afraid of what happens when it finishes learning. I am afraid of who it chooses next. Statement concludes at 11:47 a.m. Mr. Coleman, we will file this report and follow up if any actionable evidence presents itself. In the meantime, I recommend you avoid the area and refrain from monitoring social media posts related to Jerome, for your own peace of mind. Do you understand? I understand, Detective. But I do not think staying away is going to matter. Because last night, I was closing the blinds in my new apartment, and I saw him again. Not in Jerome, here, standing in the window of the building across from mine. Same posture, same stillness, watching me like he never left. Hey, Rosie, it's Poppy. I know you're not going to listen to this right away because you're still at school and your phone's probably on silent, but I need you to hear this before you do anything stupid. I saw your Instagram story last night, the one where you tagged Vulture City and said you and your friends were planning a spring break trip out there because you thought it looked cool. You need to cancel that trip. I mean it. Delete the post. Tell your friends you changed your mind. Make up any excuse you want. But do not go to that place. I know you think I'm being dramatic. I know you probably rolled your eyes when you saw I left you 3 missed calls. But I need you to trust me on this one. Because what happened to me at Vulture City is the reason I haven't slept through a full night in 8 months. I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone in the family. Something I made everyone swear not to talk about after it happened. You know how Great-Grandpa Edward used to tell those stories about working near the old mining camps, about how rough things were and how men made their own justice when the law was too far away to matter? He always made it sound like folklore, like campfire tales meant to scare kids into behaving. I used to love those stories. I even wrote about them for a history project in college, framed them like this fascinating piece of family lore about frontier survival. One of the stories he told most often was about a place called the Thief's Well, a dry shaft outside Vulture City where men accused of stealing gold would be tied up and lowered down as punishment. He said some of them were left there for days. Some of them never came back up. I thought it was exaggerated. I thought it was the kind of story that gets darker and more dramatic every time it's retold. So when I posted about it online last year, talking about this crazy piece of family history, I wasn't expecting anyone to take it seriously. But a guy named Marcus messaged me. He ran a small urban exploration channel and said he'd been trying to locate the thief's well for years. He asked if I'd be willing to come out to Vulture City with his crew and help them find it. He offered to split any ad revenue from the video and give me credit in the description. It felt like an adventure, like a way to honor great-grandpa's memory by documenting something real. I said yes, without thinking twice. We met up on a Saturday in late September. It was me, Marcus, his girlfriend Daisy, and a guy named Jacob who handled the sound equipment. The drive out to Vulture City took longer than I expected, winding through empty desert roads that seemed to go nowhere. When we finally arrived, the town looked smaller than I'd imagined. Just a handful of wooden structures and crumbling stone foundations scattered across the sand. The heat was brutal, even though the sun was starting to dip. Marcus was excited, talking non-stop about potential shots and angles. But Daisy kept looking around like she was expecting something to jump out at her. She said the place felt wrong. I laughed it off. I told her it was just the desert playing tricks, that once you're that far from civilization, everything feels a little off. We spent the first hour walking the perimeter, checking out the main buildings, filming some establishing shots. The town itself was empty. No tourists, no caretakers, just us and the wind. Marcus kept asking me if anything looked familiar from the stories, if I recognized any landmarks great-grandpa might have described. I didn't. Everything looked the same, just variations of sand and broken wood. Then Jacob found the path. It was barely visible, just a narrow trail of disturbed rocks leading away from the main cluster of buildings toward a low hill. Marcus thought it might lead to an old mining entrance, so we followed it. The well wasn't marked. There was no fence, no warning sign, nothing to indicate what it was. Just a circular stone rim about 3 feet high, half buried in the sand, with a dark opening in the center. We almost walked past it. Daisy noticed it first and called us over. When we looked down into it, we couldn't see the bottom. Marcus dropped a rock and we waited for the sound of it hitting. It took longer than it should have. When the impact finally came, it was dull and distant, like it had landed on something soft instead of stone. Marcus was thrilled. He was convinced this was it, the thief's well from my family stories. He wanted to lower the camera down on a rope to see how deep it went and get some footage of the interior. Jacob rigged up his shotgun mic on the same line so we could record any echoes or ambient sound. I remember standing there watching them work, feeling this strange heaviness in my chest that I couldn't explain. The air around the well felt colder than it should have, and there was a smell coming up from below, faint but sour, like old meat left in the sun. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to sound paranoid. They lowered the equipment slowly, playing out about 60 feet of rope before the line went slack. Marcus started the camera recording, and we all leaned in, watching the monitor as the image transmitted back. At first, it was just stone walls, rough and uneven, passing by in the dim light of the camera's LED. Then the wall stopped. The camera was hanging in open space, swaying slightly, illuminating nothing but darkness. We could hear the faint hum of the mic picking up ambient noise. Then the whispering started. It came through the headphones Jacob was wearing first. He pulled them off fast, his face going pale, and held them out so we could all hear. It was voices, multiple voices, layered over each other, speaking in a rhythm that didn't match any language I recognized. It sounded old, strained, like people talking through ruined throats. Daisy stepped back from the well. She said we needed to pull the equipment up and leave. Marcus argued. He said it was probably just wind distortion or interference from the rocks. But I could see his hands shaking as he held the monitor. I made a mistake then. I thought if we could just get a little more footage, something definitive, it would make sense. I suggested Marcus lean in farther to adjust the angle of the rope to stabilize the camera. He did. And that's when the rope went tight. Not slack, not loose. Tight, like something had grabbed it from below and pulled. Marcus lost his grip and the rope burned through his hands as it whipped downward. We heard the camera hit something hard. The monitor went black, and the mic cable snapped with a sound like a gunshot. For a few seconds, none of us moved. Then Marcus started pulling the rope back up, hand over hand, cursing under his breath. It came up too easily, no weight on it at all. When the end finally appeared, the camera was gone. The metal clip that had held it was bent open, not broken, but pried apart like someone had worked it loose with their fingers. The mic cable was worse. It hadn't snapped cleanly. The end was frayed and torn, and there were dark stains on it that none of us wanted to examine too closely. Jacob pulled out his backup recorder, the one he'd been using to capture ambient sound the whole time. He rewound it and played back the last 30 seconds. We heard ourselves talking. We heard the rope moving. And underneath it all, we heard something else. A voice, clear and distinct, speaking English. It said, "Send another one down." Then it laughed. It was a wet, choking sound, like someone drowning in shallow water. Daisy ran, just turned and sprinted back toward the cars without another word. Jacob followed her. Marcus and I stood there staring at the well, and that's when I remembered something Great-Grandpa had said. Something I'd written off as him being morbid and old. He said his father had helped lower a man named William into that well for stealing nuggets from a claim. He said William begged the whole way down, promising he'd make it right, swearing he'd pay back double. Great-Grandpa's father didn't pull him up. He said the desert would decide if William was sorry enough. 3 days later, they went back. The rope was still there, but it was shredded at the bottom. And when they pulled it up, all that came with it was a piece of cloth and something that looked like fingernails. I told Marcus we had to leave. He didn't argue this time. We walked back to the cars in silence. But as we reached the edge of town, I heard a sound behind us. It was faint, but unmistakable. Stones rolling, not falling, rolling like someone was walking in circles and kicking them loose. I turned and looked back at the hill where the well was hidden. I couldn't see it from that distance, but I could see dust rising in a lazy spiral, like something was pacing. We didn't talk about it on the drive back. Marcus deleted the footage. Jacob sold his equipment and quit doing sound work entirely. Daisy blocked all of us and moved to another state. I tried to move on. Tried to convince myself it was just a bad day in a creepy place and nothing more. But then the sound started. It was about 2 weeks after we got back. I was taking a shower and the pipe started rattling, not the usual clanking of old plumbing, but a rhythm, a pattern. It was the same cadence as the voices we'd heard in the well, that desperate pleading tone stretched out into knocking sounds. It happens every time now. Every shower. Every time I run the sink too long. Sometimes I hear it in the walls at night. That same rolling rhythm. Like someone pacing in circles just out of sight. I've had plumbers out 3 times. They say there's nothing wrong with the pipes. I know what it is, Rosie. I know what I brought back with me from that well. Great-Grandpa didn't tell us the whole story. He didn't mention that the men they left down there didn't just die. They stayed. and now one of them knows where I live. So please, Rosie, I am begging you, do not go to Vulture City. Do not look for that well. Do not think you're braver or smarter or luckier than I was. Because if you go down that path and you stand at that edge, something down there will notice you. And once it does, it will follow you home. So you asked me about previous employment. That should be a simple question, right? Most people would just list off a few job titles, maybe mention why they left, keep it brief and professional. But I need you to understand why there is a 3-month gap on my resume last year, and why I put down that I left my last position due to personal reasons. The truth is more complicated than that. And if you are going to hire me, you deserve to know what happened at Ruby, Arizona, because it is going to affect how I answer some of your other questions about reliability and long-term commitment. I took a caretaker job in Ruby back in March of last year. It was a short-term contract, 3 months, paid weekly, and the work was straightforward. The town is a legitimate ghost town, privately owned. And they needed someone on site to maintain the property and give the occasional tour when visitors showed up. Most days, I would be alone. I would walk through the old schoolhouse and make sure nothing had collapsed overnight. I would check the mine entrances to confirm the warning signs were still standing. I would lock and unlock buildings on a schedule. It was quiet work, the kind of job where you spend more time with your own thoughts than with other people. And at that point in my life, that was exactly what I needed. The first 2 weeks went exactly as expected. I stayed in a small trailer at the edge of the property. I woke up early, did my rounds, and spent my afternoons reading or hiking the area. Visitors were rare, maybe 1 or 2 cars a week, usually couples on road trips looking for something off the beaten path. I would walk them through the general store, show them the assay office, tell them the basic history of the mining operation and why everyone eventually left. It was easy, repetitive, comfortable. Then the family showed up. It was a Wednesday afternoon, unseasonably hot, and I was sitting outside the old schoolhouse when I heard a car coming up the gravel road. A silver sedan pulled into the clearing and a family of 3 got out. The father was tall, mid-40s, wearing a polo shirt and baseball cap. The mother was smaller, dark-haired, holding a camera. Their daughter looked about 10, wearing a bright yellow jacket that stood out against the pale desert backdrop. They were cheerful, the way tourists usually are, excited to see something different. The father waved and asked if I could give them a tour. I said sure, grabbed my keys, and started walking them through the main buildings. The father asked all the usual questions. How old is the town? Why did people leave? Are there any ghost stories? The mother took photos of everything. The daughter stayed quiet, but she smiled when I pointed out the old jail cell and told her about the time a prospector got locked in there as a prank and had to wait 2 days before someone remembered he was inside. They laughed. They thanked me. They asked where the best photo spot was, and I pointed them toward the overlook near the abandoned general store. Then they left. I watched their car disappear down the road, and I went back to my trailer to make dinner. I did not think about them again until the next day. Thursday afternoon, same time, almost to the minute. I heard a car on the gravel. I looked up and saw a silver sedan pulling into the clearing. The same family got out. Same polo shirt, same baseball cap, same yellow jacket. The father waved and asked if I could give them a tour. I stared at him for a moment, confused, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement that we had already met. There was nothing. No recognition. No joke about coming back for a second look. He He just stood there smiling, waiting for my answer, like it was the first time he had ever seen me. I assumed I was misremembering, that maybe it had been a different family the day before or a different color car. People start to blur together when you spend too much time alone. So I gave them the tour. Same route, same buildings, same stories. And as I talked, I started to notice things. The father asked the exact same questions in the exact same order. The mother took photos from the exact same angles. The daughter stayed quiet until I mentioned the jail cell, and then she smiled at the exact same moment. When I finished, the father asked where the best photo spot was. I told him the overlook near the general store. They thanked me and left. Friday afternoon, silver sedan, same family, same clothes, same questions. This time, I did not wait for them to speak. I walked up to the father and asked if he remembered being here yesterday. He looked at me like I was confused. He said this was their first time visiting Ruby, that they had driven out from Phoenix that morning. I asked the mother. She said the same thing. I looked at the daughter. She just stared back at me with that same small smile, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. I gave them the tour anyway. But this time I tested it. I started finishing their sentences. When the father opened his mouth to ask how old the town was, I answered before he could get the words out. When the mother lifted her camera toward the assay office window, I told her the lighting was better from the left side. She moved left without questioning how I knew. The father laughed nervously and said I must be good at reading people. I did not correct him. When we reached the jail cell, I turned to the daughter before I even started the story and said, "You are going to like this part." She nodded, still smiling, and I told the story exactly as I had the previous 2 days. Her expression did not change. It was like watching a recording play out in real time. When the tour ended, I did something different. I told them the mine entrance had the best photo spot, not the overlook. I wanted to see if they would break the pattern. The father thanked me, and they walked toward the mine. I followed at a distance, staying far enough back that they would not notice. They stopped at the entrance, stood in front of the warning signs, and stared at the boarded-up shaft. Then all three of them turned at the same time and walked toward the general store instead, the place I had told them to go the previous 2 days. They did not speak. They did not look at each other. They just moved in perfect synchronization, like they were being pulled. I did not follow them to the store. I went back to my trailer, locked the door, and tried to convince myself I was losing my mind. Isolation does strange things to people. Memory gets unreliable. Faces blend together. I'd probably seen a dozen families over the past 2 weeks, and my brain was just misfiring, creating patterns where there were none. I almost believed it. Then Saturday came. Same time, same car, same family. This time I did not give them the tour. When the father got out and waved, I stayed where I was and shouted that the property was closed for maintenance. He looked confused. He called back asking if we could reschedule, if maybe tomorrow would work. I said no. I said they needed to leave. The mother stepped forward, still holding her camera, and asked if something was wrong. I did not answer. I just stared at them, waiting for something, anything, that would prove they were real people and not whatever the hell I'd been seeing for the past 3 days. The father shrugged, put his arm around his wife, and started walking toward the old general store anyway. I shouted after them. I told them they could not go back there, that the buildings were not safe. They did not stop. They did not even turn around. They just walked in perfect unison, the daughter trailing slightly behind, all three of them headed toward the same spot. I followed, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. When I reached the store, they were standing in front of the window, the big cracked one that faced the street. They were not looking inside. They were looking at their reflections. I stopped a few feet behind them and looked at the glass. Their reflections were wrong. The father, mother, and daughter in the window were facing me, not the glass. Their mouths were moving, but no sound was coming out. Their eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, even though the real bodies in front of the glass were still staring straight ahead. I took a step back. The reflections moved closer to the glass, pressing against it from the inside, their hands flattening on the surface. Then I blinked, just once, and they were gone. All of them. The street was empty. The reflection showed nothing but the buildings behind me. There were footprints in the dust where the family had been standing, but they did not lead away. They just stopped, like whoever made them had evaporated mid-step. I quit the next morning. I did not wait for my contract to finish. I packed my trailer, drove straight to the property office, and told them I was done. I did not give them details. I just said the isolation was worse than I expected, and I needed to leave immediately. They did not fight me on it. I think they could tell something had broken in me. I have not been back to Ruby since. I have not taken any job that requires me to be alone for extended periods. And I have developed a new habit that I know sounds insane. Whenever I see a family in public, I watch them for longer than I should. I watch to see if they repeat their movements, if their expressions loop, if their reflections match what their bodies are doing. Most of the time, everything is normal. But every now and then, I see something off. A gesture that repeats too perfectly. A smile that does not quite reach the eyes. And I wonder how many of them are real, and how many are still stuck in places like Ruby, walking the same paths, asking the same questions, waiting for someone to notice they never left. Hey, thanks for taking my call. I know it is late, and I know your show usually does not do listener stories anymore. But I heard you talking about that segment you used to run. The one where people would phone in with unexplained experiences from the road. I have one of those, and I need to tell someone who might actually understand what I am talking about before I lose my nerve completely. My name is Daisy, and until 6 months ago, I drove long-haul deliveries across Arizona and Nevada. I am not doing that anymore. I am working at a grocery store now, stocking shelves on the night shift, and even though the pay is worse and the work is boring, I sleep better knowing I am never getting back in a truck. What happened near Swansea is the reason why. I had been driving that route for almost 3 years. Phoenix to Reno, sometimes with stops in between, depending on the load. It was decent work. The roads were empty most of the time, the desert stretched out in every direction, and I could listen to music or podcasts without anyone bothering me. I liked the solitude. I am not great with people, never have been. So spending 10 or 12 hours alone in a cab felt more comfortable than sitting in an office pretending to care about small talk. The route took me past a lot of abandoned places, old gas stations, collapsed motels, towns that used to have names but did not anymore. Swansea was one of those. It sat about 40 miles off the main highway, down a dirt access road I had never taken because there was no reason to. The town had been dead for decades, just another mining camp that ran out of ore and got left behind. The first time I heard the voice, it was around 2 in the morning. I was about an hour past Wickenburg, making good time, when my CB radio crackled to life. I had not heard anything on it for hours. Most drivers had switched to phones by then, and the CB was really just a backup, something I kept on out of habit. The voice that came through was male, middle-aged, and he sounded stressed. He said he was lost near Swansea and he could not find the highway. He asked if anyone could give him directions back to the main road. I picked up the handset and asked him where exactly he was. He said he was at an old gas station, boarded up with a faded sign that he could not read anymore. He said he had been circling for over an hour and kept ending up back at the same spot. I pulled out my map and tried to walk him through it. I told him to head east from the gas station until he hit pavement, then follow that north until he saw route markers. He said he tried that already, that the road just looped him back around. I asked if his GPS was working. He said he did not have one, that his phone had died hours ago. His voice was getting tighter, more panicked, and I could hear his engine running in the background, a low idle that sounded rough and uneven. I stayed on the line with him for over an hour, trying different directions, asking him to describe landmarks, anything that might help me figure out where he actually was. But nothing he said matched the area I knew. He kept describing buildings that should not exist anymore, roads that had been closed off, a layout that did not fit any map I had. Then the signal cut. It did not fade out gradually. It just stopped mid-sentence, replaced by a screech of feedback that made me yank the handset away from my ear. I tried calling back, switching through channels, but there was nothing. Just static. I told myself he probably figured it out, found his way back, and his radio died. I kept driving. But the next time I passed that stretch of road, same time of night, same mile marker, the voice came back. Same greeting, same problem, same panicked tone. He said he was lost near Swansea and he could not find the highway. Word for word, it was identical to the first time. I keyed the mic and said I remembered him, asked if he had gotten out the last time. There was a pause, just static, and then he continued, like I had not said anything. He described the gas station again, the boarded windows, the unreadable sign. He asked if anyone could help him find the main road. I tried interrupting, tried asking his name, tried asking how long he had been out there. He did not respond to any of it. He just kept talking in the same loop, describing the same landmarks, asking the same question. Then the feedback hit again, sharp and sudden, and the line went dead. It happened 4 more times over the next 2 months. Every time I drove that route at night, around the same mile marker, the voice would come through. Always the same words, always the same background noise. I started recording it on my phone, playing it back to myself during the day to make sure I was not imagining the repetition. It was exact, not just similar, identical. The pauses, the breaths, even the little nervous laugh he gave when he said he had been driving in circles. It was like listening to a recording, except it was happening live on the CB every single time. Then it got worse. The 6th time it happened, I answered him like I always did. And this time, he said something different. He said he could see a truck that looked like mine. He described it perfectly. The color, the model, the company logo on the side. He said it kept passing him on the road over and over. But every time he tried to flag it down, it was already gone. My stomach dropped. I looked in my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. There was nothing out there but darkness and the faint glow of my own taillights reflected in the dust. I asked him where he was seeing this truck. He said it was right in front of him, brake lights flashing, about to turn off the road. I was not touching my brakes. I was holding steady at 70 miles an hour on a straight stretch of highway. I told him he was wrong, that he could not be seeing me because I was nowhere near Swansea. He did not respond. Instead, I heard my own voice come through the radio. It was me, from an earlier conversation, giving him directions. My voice was slightly distorted, like it had been recorded on bad equipment and played back through a speaker, but it was unmistakably mine. I was hearing myself tell him to head east, to look for pavement, to follow the route markers north. It was the exact advice I had given him the first time, replayed back to me while I sat in my truck listening. I pulled over. I had to. My hands were shaking so badly, I could not hold the wheel steady. I killed the engine and sat there in the dark. The CB still crackling with my own voice, giving directions to someone who was not responding. Then the voice on the radio shifted again. It was still me, but this time I was describing my current location. It said I was parked on the shoulder near mile marker 183. It said the engine was off. It said I was holding the handset, but I was not speaking. Every word was accurate. Every detail was something that was happening in real time, but I was not the one saying it. I threw the handset down and turned off the CB. I restarted the truck and drove straight through the rest of the night without stopping, without turning the radio back on, without looking at anything except the road in front of me. When I got to Reno, I told my dispatcher I was done. I turned in my keys, walked away from the truck, and never went back. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought if I stopped driving that route, stopped putting myself near that mile marker, the voice would stay where it belonged. But it did not. 3 weeks after I quit, I was at home, sitting in my kitchen, trying to relax with some late-night radio. I was scanning through stations, looking for something that was not commercials or static, when I landed on a frequency that sounded like a CB channel. And I heard it, the same voice, the same plea. He said he was lost near Swansea, and he could not find the highway. I froze, my hand hovering over the dial. Then I heard the response. It was my voice again, offering directions, describing landmarks, telling him to head east. The conversation played out exactly as it had months before, me and him, looping through the same exchange. I turned the radio off and sat there in the dark, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, that CB frequencies sometimes bled into AM bands, that I was tired and paranoid. But it keeps happening. Not every night, but often enough that I have stopped listening to the radio entirely. Sometimes I will be lying in bed, the apartment completely silent, and I will hear it faintly through the walls. That same distressed voice asking for help, that same recording of me answering. And underneath it, barely audible, the sound of an engine idling rough and uneven, like it is coming from somewhere far away and impossibly close at the same time. 2 nights ago, I broke my own rule. I turned on the radio in my car just for a second, just to see if it was still there. It was. But this time, after the usual exchange. After my recorded voice finished giving directions, there was a new sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching over gravel. Then the voice spoke again, but it was not asking for directions anymore. It said my name. It said, "Daisy, I can see your apartment from here." It described my building. It described the window of my kitchen. It said the lights were on, and I was standing near the counter. I was standing near the counter. I looked out the window at the empty parking lot, at the dark desert beyond, and I saw nothing. But I heard the voice continue. It said it had been waiting for me to come back, that it knew I would eventually, that everyone who heard the broadcast always came back. I have not turned the radio on since. I have not driven past that stretch of highway. I have not gone near Swansea or any of the roads that lead to it. But I do not think it matters anymore. I think whatever is out there, whatever keeps playing that loop, has figured out where I live. Because last night, at 2 in the morning, I heard a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. But when I pressed my ear to the door, I heard it. That rough, uneven engine, idling, waiting. And underneath it, my own voice, faint and distorted, giving directions to someone who will never find their way out. Jacob's statement to Park Ranger, filed November 14th, 2024. My name is Jacob Allen, and I am filing this report because I do not know what else to do. What happened at Gila City 3 weeks ago has left me unable to sleep, unable to focus, and unable to shake the feeling that I made a choice that cost someone their life. I was part of a hiking group, 6 of us total, led by a local amateur historian named Greg, who ran weekend tours of abandoned Arizona settlements. The trip to Gila City was supposed to be educational, a chance to see the ruins of an old mining camp and learn about its history. It was supposed to be safe. We were supposed to all come back. We arrived at the site around 10 in the morning. The weather was clear, temperatures mild, and the ruins were more extensive than I expected. Foundations of old buildings, scattered equipment, piles of brick and rotted wood. Greg was enthusiastic, walking us through what each structure used to be, pointing out details most of us would have missed. The group was friendly. There was Millie, a grad student studying Southwestern history; Henry, a photographer documenting ghost towns; a couple from Tucson whose names I did not catch; and Rosie, a quiet woman in her late 20s, who mostly kept to herself but seemed genuinely interested in the site. About an hour into the tour, I started hearing something strange. It sounded like children laughing, faint and distant, coming from the brush beyond the ruins. I asked if anyone else heard it. Millie nodded. Henry said he thought it was birds at first, but the rhythm was wrong. Greg dismissed it, said the desert played tricks with sound, that wind through the rocks could create all kinds of illusions. We kept walking, but the laughter did not stop. It followed us as we moved between buildings, always just out of sight, always at the edge of hearing. During a break, Millie found something half buried in the sand near one of the collapsed walls. It was a small metal toy, a horse, old and tarnished, but still recognizable. She picked it up and commented on how cold it felt despite sitting in direct sunlight. She slipped it into her jacket pocket without much thought. I did not think anything of it at the time. People find random objects in places like this all the time. But after she pocketed it, the laughter got louder. Not by much, but enough that we all noticed. Greg suggested we move to a different part of the site, somewhere farther from the brush. We were walking toward the remains of what Greg said used to be a general store, when Rosie asked if we could take a short break. She said she wanted to photograph a section of wall that had interesting graffiti carved into it. It was about 50 yards away, still visible from where we stood. Greg said to make it quick, that we needed to stay on schedule if we wanted to finish the tour before the heat got worse. Rosie walked off with her camera, and the rest of us sat down in the shade of a partial roof. We were talking, drinking water, not paying close attention. When I looked up 10 minutes later, Rosie was gone. At first, we assumed she had moved to a different angle or gone around the other side of the wall. Greg called her name. No answer. We stood up and walked toward the spot where we had last seen her. Her camera bag was sitting on the ground, open, with her water bottle beside it. But Rosie was nowhere in sight. Henry started joking that she was probably just out of earshot, crouched behind some rocks getting the perfect shot. But his voice did not sound convinced. We spread out and started searching, calling her name, checking behind every standing wall and collapsed structure in the area. That was when I saw the footprints. They were small, child-sized, pressed into the soft dirt near where Rosie's bag sat. There were dozens of them, overlapping and circling, like a group of kids had been running around in loops. But none of us had seen any children. The site was empty except for our group. I pointed them out to Greg. He crouched down and examined them, his face going pale. He said we needed to call for help, that something was not right. But when we checked our phones, none of us had service. We were too far out, too deep in the desert. We kept searching for another 20 minutes, moving farther from the main cluster of ruins. The laughter started again, but this time it was not distant. It was close, coming from multiple directions, layered and echoing in a way that made no sense in open desert. Millie said she kept hearing a little girl whispering near her ear, saying the same phrase over and over. You came back. I did not hear it myself, but I could see the fear in her face. Henry said he saw movement near an old stone well on the far edge of the site, small figures darting between the rocks. When we got closer, there was nothing there except more footprints. Then we heard Rosie. Her voice carried across the ruins, faint but clear, calling for help. She sounded scared. She sounded close. We ran toward the sound, following it deeper into the site, past structures we had not explored yet, toward an area Greg said was unstable and off-limits. The voice led us to the well Henry had seen earlier. It was deep, stone-lined, with no rope or bucket, just a dark opening that dropped straight down. Rosie's voice was coming from inside. She was calling our names, asking why we left her, begging us to help her out. Greg shouted down into the well, asking if she was hurt, asking how she got down there. The voice stopped. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the laughter started again, but this time it was coming from the well. Dozens of voices, children's voices, laughing in unison. And underneath it, barely audible, I heard Rosie. But she was not calling for help anymore. She was screaming. Millie's voice note to Sarah, recorded November 15th, 2024. Sarah, I do not know if you're going to listen to this, but I need to tell you what happened because I cannot keep it inside anymore. We left her there. We left Rosie in Gila City, and I do not think I am ever going to forgive myself for it. After we heard her screaming from the well, Greg made the call. He said the sun was going down, that we did not have the equipment to do a rescue, that we needed to get back to the cars and call for professional help. He said if we stayed, we would all be in danger. The rest of the group agreed. I wanted to argue. I wanted to stay and figure out a way to get her out. But I was terrified. The voices would not stop. The laughter was everywhere. And when I looked at the others, I could see they felt the same way. So we left. We hiked back to the parking area as fast as we could. The whole way, I could still hear Rosie's voice behind us, getting fainter, calling our names, asking us to come back. When we reached the cars, Greg called emergency services. They said they would send a team out at first light, that it was too dangerous to attempt a rescue in the dark. We waited in the parking lot for hours, none of us willing to leave, none of us willing to go back. When the search team arrived the next morning, they found Rosie's camera bag exactly where we said it would be. They found the footprints. They found her jacket near the well, but they did not find her. The well was only 15 feet deep. The bottom was dry, covered in sand and debris. There was no body, no sign that anyone had fallen in, no evidence that Rosie had ever been there. The search team expanded their perimeter, checking every building, every gully, every possible place she could have gone. They brought in dogs. They brought in drones. After 5 days, they called it off. Rosie was listed as missing, presumed dead, cause unknown. The official report said she likely wandered off and succumbed to the elements, that the desert could hide a body indefinitely if the conditions were right. But I know that is not what happened. I know because 3 nights ago, I woke up to the sound of a little girl laughing outside my bedroom door. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. There are no children in the units near mine. I got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but when I pressed my ear to the door, I could hear footsteps, small footsteps, running in circles. And underneath that, I heard Rosie's voice. She was asking someone to let her go, saying she did not want to play anymore. I opened the door. The hallway was still empty, but there were wet footprints on the carpet, child-sized, leading away from my door and disappearing at the elevator. I followed them. The prints stopped at the elevator doors, but the floor indicators showed it was going down. I watched the numbers drop. 3, 2, 1. Ground floor. Then it kept going. Basement. Sub-basement. The building does not have a sub-basement. The toy horse I found in Gila City, the one I put in my jacket pocket and forgot about, is sitting on my kitchen counter right now. I have thrown it away 3 times. It keeps coming back. Last night, it was sitting on top of the map I printed out before the trip, the one with Gila City marked in red. This morning, there were tiny handprints in the dust on my coffee table, like someone small had been walking across it while I slept. I hear the footsteps every night now, running, playing, circling my apartment like they are looking for something. And sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet, I hear Rosie's voice mixed in with the laughter, asking why we left, asking when we are coming back to play. I do not know what to do, Sarah. I do not know how to make it stop. And I am terrified that one night I am going to open my door and find out.